James Cameron's Avatar movies have been the butt of many jokes for the past 15 years, and I'm completely sick of it. Sure, the series isn't subtle, and neither of the movies are perfect at all, but I will absolutely die on the hill that the first movie is art. Although I can't say the same about the games, mostly since I've never played them. Until today! Yeah, I spent the past couple weeks trying my best to play every Avatar game in existence. Mostly since I have endless free time and no self-respect. A combination made in hell. In December 2009, just 2 weeks before the movie premiered, Avatar the game was released on everything except the PS2, although there wasn't one but 4 separate games across all platforms. And that's just direct tie-ins, but that stuff comes later. Also, sorry about my audio quality, I'm recording in a different setup right now. This is the HD version developed by Ubisoft Montreal, the same studio that worked on both Watch Dogs and TMNT. And I liked both of those games. Avatar is a third-person shooter that's a prequel to the movie where you play as Ryder, an RDA Marine and non-binary icon. After witnessing the RDA do a war crime or two, Ryder can choose whether to side with the Native American allegory or commit a genocide. Regardless of what side you choose, you become a vital part of the Na'vi RDA war, with the goal of driving the other side out of Pandora completely. Making it a prequel must have been a mandate by Cameron, since this is not the only game that is a prequel to the first movie, but it's ultimately a smart decision, since the game still works as an advertisement for the film, while also expanding on the world in a way that doesn't even attempt to adapt that story. Simply because I don't think everything needs to be adapted. But there's barely even a story here once that initial choice is made, or if you decide to defect sides at the end of the game. There's some world building here, like once you get closer to the end of the RDA playthrough, more parts of Pandora are littered with dead animals who become sick with earthly diseases, Na'vi corpses, and burnt down forests. Again, this is a series that's not subtle at all. The humans are hunting for a resource known as unobtainium after all, but I appreciate that this evil playthrough didn't miss the point entirely and became a fucking Call of Duty game in space. But outside of small moments like that or cameos from characters like Quaritch, Grace, and Trudy, the entire thing just devolves into repetitive tasks of retrieving shards to do a thing. The actual story happens off screen, with plot points like a Na'vi named Beitamo hunting down your RDA friends, and your Lieutenant Falco betraying the RDA off screen, both of which are just reported back to you in cutscenes after they've already occurred. Obviously, this is not a story that's meant to be taken seriously. Its sole purpose is to simply adapt the world of Pandora, and that's where the game's budget really went. Boy, the sense of scale Ubisoft went for in this game is fucking commendable. Pandora is separated into multiple large maps, all of which have no loading screens after the initial one, and no matter what area you're in, there's constantly battles going on in the background that you can get involved in, something I wasn't expecting at all. There is a fast travel system, but I rarely used it since it was fun to drive around in buggies or fly in the Hallelujah Mountains. Although the Banshees control like cars, with the reverse button, that's fucking weird. I was really concerned that this would just be a bland military shooter, but Avatar was surprisingly decent. There is some influence taken from games like Halo, and not just because you play as a Marine on an alien planet, but the dynamic nature of the sandbox. Pandora is absolutely littered with different vehicles and creatures to ride, on top of having different weapons and skills to equip, from grenade launchers and machine guns to dual pistols, my favorite thing in games. Shooting can take a bit to get used to since there's no lock-on or aim down sights at all, as well as no cover mechanic, but that's because Avatar is a pretty chaotic game. Everything in Pandora is constantly trying to kill you in the RDA playthrough, and the Na'vi are weaker than humans, so the emphasis here is to constantly keep moving. Although I will say that the Na'vi playthrough was a bit less enjoyable as a game. You still have one machine gun, but there's a bigger emphasis on melee, and it's just kind of there. You just press the R1 button until the thing dies. It's pretty janky, and the same goes for the rest of the game. The open world's technological feat is sort of sullied by the drab colors and completely lackluster performance. I get that the 2000s were a time of games looked like they were smeared in baked beans, but Avatar is a vibrant movie, so this feels much more out of place than usual. And the performance? Damn. Playing this on a PlayStation 3 feels like you're watching a YouTube video and someone's constantly unplugging your Wi-Fi over and over again just for fun. The sporadic frame rate made the majority of the game's battles a slog to play through, especially near the end when you're required to fly everywhere as there's constant explosions and aerial battles, bringing the game down to the single digits at points. Usually there's some alternatives here, but the 360 copy isn't backwards compatible on the newer Xbox systems, and the PC version is almost impossible to obtain since the game was delisted in 2013. There are physical copies, but there's no telling if those would work on modern Windows with whatever fucking DRM that they had. But even without the performance issues, the game is somewhat barren once that shine wears off, and the RDA base is a perfect example. Hell's Gate is insanely accurate to the movie. Ubisoft must have been given access to the 3D models or something, because the amount of detail here is honestly intimidating, down to Parker's little piece of unobtainium on his desk. Except, that's about all it's got going for it. Sure, you can walk around this decently sized base, there's a mess hall, an armory, some labs, the avatar station, even the map of Pandora, all of which you see in the movie. But none of it serves any purpose or has any depth beyond the initial oohs and ahs. To some, that makes this a spot-on adaptation, but those people are fucking wrong. Avatar for the PS3 is a cut above most movie licensed games, and had it focused on just one campaign or having just one semi-large world, there might have been more depth given to the story and mission variety. However, as is, it's still pretty impressive for how much this game just shot for the stars. When it comes to mobile games, Avatar had a lot, all of which are now delisted, and one of which is actually lost media. So I'm just gonna lump these all together into one section, since I've never played them as a kid, but I wouldn't be doing my part if I didn't at least talk about them. The main game made to coincide with the 2009 movie was developed by Gameloft, who sort of specializes in licensed mobile games. I specifically remember wanting to play the amazing Spider-Man game that they made. So fucking bad. Avatar is a level-based third-person action game with a completely different story. It's yet another prequel about some guy in the Avatar program named Ryan. What a name. Who also ends up defecting from the RDA. It'd be easy to make fun of how this looks like a PlayStation 1 game, but for something that was designed to be played on a fucking iPod Touch, it's pretty impressive. Some of the levels here are pretty open and even allow you to ride dire horses. There's even another Panzer Dragoon section, except it looks much easier to control here. It's also a decently long game, coming in at about 4 or so hours. It definitely seems clunky and not really fun to play at all nowadays, but has some novelty as a game from a bygone era. There's a Java game also developed by Gameloft for older phones. Due to the limited hardware, it's a 2D platformer that seems pretty bare bones. Although, it is an interesting game to me, since out of all the games I have and will talk about, this is the only one that attempts to adapt the movie, except it's a weird, gimped version of it that only has Jake, Neytiri, and Grace. Quaritch's name is misspelled, and Jake is implied to die in the end. This game is weird, and I'd probably played it if I only cared enough to get a Java emulator up and running. The most recent mobile game to come out of this franchise was Avatar Reckoning, a now cancelled free-to-play MMO that was supposed to release sometime this year. Of course, it is yet another RDA Avatar switching sides, and at this point, I gotta ask whether or not the RDA is just hemorrhaging money making soldiers for the other team. As a mobile game, it's kind of impressive. The animation quality is subpar, and there's definitely some drawbacks to the shadows and such. However, this is beta footage that we're talking about here, and the addition of Unreal Engine 4 makes this and the Gameloft mobile game feel like a century apart as opposed to just 15 years. I honestly wished Archosaur Games made this for console, or at the very least PC, to just let this game's visuals shine a bit more. The character creator seems very in-depth, which is a big thing to me. It's even better than the ones we'll see in later AAA games, and overall, it seems like there was an attempt by Archosaur to make something that isn't just shooting. There's honestly no reason that this should have been a free-to-play PvP MMO, except for the monetary benefit of paid in-game currency. Greed. Just a few months ago, 2 years after the game was announced, the developer announced its cancellation, citing restructuring as the reason why. It seems like the franchise understandably wants to sweep this all under the rug since everything linking to it has been taken down, with the trailer and beta gameplay as the only surviving evidence. As much as I'm not into multiplayer, not a fan of PvP, or free-to-play games with bloated gameplay mechanics and predatory monetization, it's a shame that this and the other mobile games are pretty much lost to time. Don't look at those. Shut the fuck up. We have more games to play.
Civilizations will be decided by the choices of a single soul. Enter the world, ignite the war. James Cameron's Avatar, the game, rated T for teen.
Released for the Wii and PSP, the standard definition version of Avatar, also developed by Ubisoft Montreal, is a completely separate game that's another prequel, this time about a Na'vi named Ryuk, who's the last of his clan, going through various RDA camps, and retrieving heirlooms as revenge. While I appreciate that this isn't another game about a soldier defecting, as a story it's a bit on the nose, especially for a game that's definitely geared towards kids given the platforms it was released on. But the idea of a separate, smaller scoped action stealth game is clever from a business angle, since it can entice kids who say own both a PS3 and a PSP to double dip. However, I have seen how bad some of Ubisoft's licensed games can be, and Avatar for the Wii is definitely near the bottom of the barrel. It's a shame that the Wii's reputation is not due to the console itself, but due to developers who use Waggle as an attempt to make up for lazy games, and Avatar is definitely one of them. Avatar for the Wii and PSP is a stiff game with short levels where the entire goal is to sneak around until you find a relic. That's it. I can assure you that by the second mission, you've seen the majority of what this game has to offer. Most of the stages are the same copy and pasted soldiers you can stealth kill while constantly deactivating turrets and lasers, all of which you do with QuickTime events. Of course they aren't controlled by buttons, but with waggling the fucking Wiimote. There's some Panzer Dragoon sections on a Banshee which sounds perfect for this kind of level-based game, except that you control the Banshee with the nunchuck motion controls, not the stick, while also having to aim with the Wiimote. It feels like trying to write with both hands at the same time. It feels wrong. And God bless the poor bastards who try to play this with the balance board. Even with my Wiimote that has Motion Plus, the motion controls always fell off, which sucks for a mechanic that's integrated into every facet of the game, including the menus. What fascinates me, and by that I mean pisses me off, is that the Wii has multiple control options, and yet none of them are used. This was released on the PSP, just put traditional controls in this version too. But I'm sure that even if this game had better controls, you're left with mediocre combat, underwhelming stealth, copy and paste enemies, and never-ending QuickTime events. Hence why I dropped this game about halfway through the story, 2 hours in. It also doesn't help that outside of the short cutscenes, the story this game just tries to tell is covered in walls of texts. I didn't know that this would be a fucking visual novel. I guess the soundtrack is decent. The one for the PS3 and 360 version tried to emulate the more triumphant battle themes as well as the main theme from the movie, while the Wii game's OST tries to capture those calmer, more ethereal tracks. But that's really all this game has going for it. It's clear that Avatar for the Wii and PSP was a second thought, simply made to take advantage of the large user bases for both systems, which is something I've talked about before, games made solely to take advantage of the Wii and the PSP, but here it's fucking hell. Haven't been given more attention and polish, this would have been a case of having two different yet interesting games with the same title. But as is, this is just shovelware meant to disappoint children on Christmas when the commercials look like this, but then you're stuck playing whatever the fuck Ubisoft made here. This game is simply a canon event for kids who had the Wii. This was the title I knew the least about going into this video. I was a PSP kid, the DS was completely foreign to me. Avatar for the DS is yet another Ubisoft game, but here is a top-down adventure title made in the vein of Zelda games, which is not what I was expecting at all here. Of course, it's another prequel, but this time it's about a child named Nock who has to save his village from the RDA. I do like that we get to see the RDA invade Pandora from the perspective of a child, although it is pretty weird to see the harder edges of the franchise sanded off to the point that it's almost unrecognizable. I mean, the movie this is advertising has a fucking sex scene in it. Since this is inspired by 2D Zelda games, you're mostly going to be fighting enemies and solving puzzles in order to progress. The further you get in the game, the more tools you unlock to complete said puzzles, and the more upgrades you get like health or damage. Pretty par for the course, except everything you do in the game is done with the stylus. Even the menus. I'm getting flashbacks to the Wii game, man. I get that was one of the DS's main selling points, and it seems like an easy way to get kids interested in the game, specifically younger ones. Mind you, as somebody who was 9 when the first movie came out, Avatar had a shit ton of toys and merchandise. However, actually playing the game and just swiping the screen is so monotonous. It's a bit difficult to get the different attacks to register, although that could just be the emulator I'm using. I mean the perfectly legitimate DS console that I modded. Wait, you can't mod them either, fuck. Regardless, playing this game made me wish it had more up its sleeve. I can honestly say that I preferred playing the game for the Wii, because Avatar for the DS is worse than being bad. It's boring. Like, the music is kind of pretty, but outside of that, it's attempting nothing new here. It's a functional game, and if I was a kid, playing this on a road trip would definitely become a core memory, but playing it as an adult, it just feels like a game that's not trying at all to do anything the platform hadn't seen before. And especially when put up against the other games in this video, it really stands out as a nothing burger. I'm sorry if this was your favorite game as a kid, but you'll get over it. And now, we finally made it to the most recent Avatar game, the one that incited this entire video idea, Frontiers of Pandora. It was originally meant to tie in with Way of Water, and to be fair, it was released in December of 2023, but if anything, this is a good thing. In a post-Arkham, Insomniac Spider-Man world, the focus for AAA licensed games is to be quality, rather than to be pushed up just for brand synergy's sake. This isn't just a Metal Gear clone. However, there's a trade-off there. Frontiers is a massive open-world game with a sprawling story, that's published by Ubisoft, the company I've kicked constantly for an abundance of crimes, the biggest of which being their repetitive game design. And here's the thing, as much as I fault Ubisoft's games for being so samey for almost a decade at this point, that formula can be executed at a varying range of quality. As much as I like Watch Dogs 1 and 2 from Ubisoft Montreal, Legion from Ubisoft Toronto is one of the most soulless games I have ever attempted to play. And to be fair, I've never played Massive Entertainment's previous games like The Division 1 and 2 or Just Dance Now. So I went into Frontiers of Pandora with an open mind and came out somewhat pleased. It's definitely glitchy and there's some bloat here, but on the whole, I had a good 24 hours playing through the main story, which is about a group of kids from the Sarentu clan who are taken from their homes as babies by some guy named John Mercer. Great fucking villain name, and are forced to become RDA soldiers during the first movie, but they're saved by their teacher named Alma and put into cryo machines only to wake up 16 years later just so that this can line up with Way of Water. That's literally the only reason that any of that fucking happened. Once you create your character and exit the RDA facility, you and the rest of your friends figured out that your clan was completely wiped out and now have to work alongside the resistance to get other surrounding clans to team up in order to stop Mercer and the RDA. Pretty much like all of these Avatar games, just do the first movie again. It's a very bare-bones story, and like the movies, is much more focused on characters than moment-to-moment plot points. However, it's not like there's nothing there. I appreciate that Frontiers doesn't just draw the line between good humans and evil ones. It actually goes a step further to call out that the majority of the humans on our side were complicit with the RDA's actions. And it even questions what it's like to be a child of two conflicting worlds without sounding like a logic rant.
In my blood is the slave and the master.
You what?
Outside of a small, obvious reveal near the end, the story is really focused on your unnamed character exploring Pandora for the first time and uniting the Aranhe, Zeswa, and Kamatire clans. The missions where you tame your Ikran or destroy aerial RDA devices are the exact kind of set pieces you'd expect in an Avatar game, and they're executed in a way that maintains that cinematicness without going full walking sim. That's one thing I can give this game credit for. Everything is fast fast. Stealth is suggested but not forced. Even in missions like this dream sequence where you play as a king lore bug and get backstory on just why that they're endangered, that lasts less than 5 minutes. The main focus of the story missions themselves will be helping each clan leader with whatever issues the RDAs cause in their respective part of Pandora, like the forest, the Great Plains, and the Clouded Forest. So completing the story feels like you're constantly making progress. Not to mention the mountain of side quests and activities. Now, there are towers in this game, but credit must be given to Massive since they're unlike the plethora we've seen in previous Ubisoft games. Each one serves a completely different purpose for the RDA, like drills or outposts, and have varying layouts as well as methods of destroying them. They do just whittle down to shooting the soldiers in amp suits, but they're fun. That's the thing about the Ubisoft formula. It's not that it can't be fun, it's that it just hasn't been evolved upon at all. And while it isn't perfect, there's been a clear attempt at evolution here in Frontiers. The hunting, gathering, and crafting feel natural. Fellow Na'vi will just give you materials like raw meat if you talk to them. There's a mechanic called disharmony where basically if you play this like a Call of Duty game and just recklessly kill everything, flora and fauna alike, AWA will punish you. Na'vi will stop talking to you, your senses will stop working. It's a unique system that forces the player to recognize this as not just another open world forest to terrorize, but Pandora. Although the leveling system felt a little bit ridiculous, and like it was just added since every AAA game has a level system now, the lack of any melee weapons felt like a big missed opportunity, especially with the 3 different variations of bow and arrows here. The menus are very overloaded, even with the large text option enabled. Playing this on a TV feels like a vision test. The game is also pretty buggy. On Series S, I experienced frame stutters even when completely disconnected from my recording setup, extreme pop-in, as well as one complete crash. This was only a bit irksome to me, but I can't imagine the feeling of paying $70 for this with a Series S as your only next-gen system. I understand that the system is underpowered when compared to the PS5 and Series X especially, but it almost feels like the new Wii, where some ports are just not up to snuff and don't take advantage of the hardware at all. It's especially bothersome with the addition of a season pass that has nothing to show for right now, as well as cosmetics that can only be purchased with real money. Thanks, I hate it. I'm somewhat thankful for the framework of this video since it not only pushed me to play the Frontiers only 5 months after its launch, which is very early for me, but to finish it, since as mesmerizing and as fun as this game was, I might not have outside of making a video. It's a good game, arguably the most cohesive and enjoyable one I've talked about, and I'm glad that I finished it, but it's just too long. There's plenty of games I've spent upwards of 40 hours in over the past year, and somehow, with me rushing through Frontiers 24-hour story and just ignoring side quests completely after the first act, I still felt the pull to drop it at points. It's not a bad game or mediocre. It's good, just not fully up to par with what the concept could be. And frankly, it makes me a little concerned for Massive's other licensed open world game releasing this fall only 1 year later. Uh-oh. What have we learned today? Well, Ubisoft has made 4 different Avatar games and has had varying results, ranging from good to how fucking dare you disgrace my presence in this fucking manner. Ironically, as someone who's become somewhat disillusioned with them in modern times, the open world titles were the ones that I enjoyed more here, mainly due to their ambition and clear attention to detail. With a world as big and unexplored as Pandora, the different stories that can be told are almost endless. Although I fear that as development costs keep rising, Frontiers might be the only Avatar game for the foreseeable future. Especially with the timeline it's taken for these movies to release. The 5th one will come out when I'm 30, for fuck's sake. Oh, the trailer for Avatar 3 just dropped. Oh my gosh. Oh, I gotta click it. I wonder what Quarch is gonna do in this one. Oh. Son of a bitch!
Was an ordinary guy.
I'm not looking for any trouble.
See ya. But one man will help him discover his true destiny.
True power comes from inside.